If you woke up every morning and I told you you suck at what you did, that you don't belong doing what you do, that you shouldn't be here, that this guy should be here, that you haven't earned this right. You have a terrible person that's telling you things that you don't want to hear, or that you probably shouldn't be hearing. You're going to start to believe that about yourself. And so that's sort of like what ended up happening.
So that was Tua Tagovailoa unleashing on his former coach, Brian Flores. The Dolphins quarterback opened up about Flores in an interview on the Dan Le Batard show, calling him a terrible person. Flores, who comes from the Bill Belichick coaching tree, was the Dolphins head coach from 2019 to 2021, and the team drafted Tua before his second season with the number 5 pick in the 2020 NFL draft. Here's Flores yesterday addressing what Tua had to say. Take a listen.
I'm happy, genuinely happy, genuinely happy for the success that Tua's had, and I really wish him nothing but the best. Look, I've done a lot of reflecting on the situation, communication. I think there's things that I could do better, for sure, and I've grown in that way, and I've tried to apply the things that I could do better and the things that I've learned, over the last, 2-3 years.
The words you used were terrible person. I'm just curious how that hit you.
Look, I'm human, so, that hit me in a way that, I wouldn't say it was, positive for me. But at the same time, I've got to use that and say, hey, how can I grow from that? How can I be better? And that's really where I'm at from that standpoint. Do I feel like, that's me? No, but how can I grow from that situation and create a world where that's not, the case that anyone says that about Brian Flores.
Interesting. Took that on the chin. Stephen A., what's your reaction to Flores' response yesterday?
I'm very interested in this story because if Brian Flores is listening, and I have no doubt that he is, I didn't hear any denials about what Tua said. And because I didn't hear any denials on his part about the assertions that Tua made, yes, he deserves credit for manning up, talking about looking in the mirror, giving him an opportunity to reflect upon himself, his behavior, how he conducted himself as head coach of the Miami Dolphins at the time. And as a result, we all grow, and I applaud him for that. But it's still important because he has a lawsuit pending against the National Football League. There were 8 head coaching opportunities. He didn't get interviewed for one of them. Remember, in Miami, his last 2 seasons, they had a winning record. It was the first back-to-back winning seasons the Miami Dolphins had registered in 18 years. He was the head coach of that team when he ultimately got let go. And then to know that, and then to have this legal matter going on, it's not an accident that Mike Tomlin had to step in and save the day by bringing him on board to make sure he remained employed, which obviously facilitated him landing in Minnesota as a defensive coordinator, where he did a damn good job last year and is expected to do so this year. So why didn't you get interviewed for any of those head coaching jobs? It's because of these legal matters. And the legal matters are important because some of the things that he may assert, whether it's about his former boss, Stephen Ross in Miami, or about the league itself, there's an indictment against him with Tua's comments. And so I expected him to flat out categorically deny it. He didn't do that. If he didn't do that, one would deduce there was a lot of truth to what Tua is saying. And if there indeed was a lot of truth to what Tua is saying, then some of the assertions he's making legally against his former team and the league all of a sudden dissipate in potency before our very eyes. That's what I'm looking at. So when he says he's reflective and all of that stuff, I applaud that. And I hope that he gets another opportunity to be a head coach in the league. But we got to pay attention to what's going on with his legal matters because Tua stung him big time.
Credit Tua for speaking his truth. Obviously, there's 2 sides to every story, 3 sides, both sides in the truth. but I credit Tua because we rarely hear players give this level of insight and honesty about their own experiences in the NFL. I'm a big Brian Flores fan as a person, but really a football mind because he's so sharp. But what pained me in this situation was to hear Tua talk about what he dealt with and how he seems like a new man because he's away from that toxic situation with the head coach. And I think what we've seen in Minnesota and in Pittsburgh, Brian Flores has grown from that to a situation because in that interview where he was talking to reporters, he was flanked by two current defensive players in Minnesota. And those two players purposely stood next to him because they knew the questions were coming and they wanted to show support for a coach that since he joined the franchise in Minnesota has been that relationship guy, has welcomed guys into his house to meet his family. And that's the change and the growth that we've seen in Brian Flores since that Tua situation. But one of those players, Harrison Phillips, did acknowledge that when Flores got the job, he was a little reticent. He was a little on edge because he didn't know exactly what they were getting in Brian Flores because obviously players talk. And the situation in Miami did leave a lot of scars. I think the unfortunate thing is coaches, and this is not just Brian Flores, but coaches, the best coaches, understand that you cannot coach quarterbacks the same way as every other position. We're, all 53 and all that, quarterbacks are different. But a good coach, a great coach understands that it's not just the quarterback or the position you're in, it's each individual player. You got to know, like, yeah, I could give Stephen A. a little ribbon. I know that he's going to come back at me, and he'll come back at me even harder. Mike T, I might be a little softer. I might be a little softer with Mike T. But I'm going to coach him up and then know that after a few reps with me and him on TV, like, he's going to come at me hard. Like, you got to know people's personalities, and great head coaches understand that there is a difference. Not everything is created equal. And it's a shame because Tua, a lot of people look at Tua thinking that he saw, thinking oh, here he goes complaining about his coach. That's not right. That's the man's experience, and it is an unfortunate situation at the most important position.
You know what was interesting to me, guys? My observations about what Coach Flores said was very similar to yours, Stephen A., which was he owned it, but I actually think that portends well for the rest of his coaching career because that's an example of a growth mindset, someone that's going to learn from the past. He did not run from it, and I thought that was extremely positive. The best coaches I've been around, starting with a guy, Coach Parcells, understood that you needed to have more than one pitch. To Kmart's point, some people can take hard coaching, some can't. And obviously, Coach Flores, if he could go back in time, would probably understand that, hey, I probably need more equity in this relationship to coach Tua hard. Rex Ryan, who I had the privilege of working with for 4 years, always talked about players don't care how much you know until you know how much you care. And I think what Coach Flores learned was maybe the way Bill Belichick coached Tom Brady in year 10, 12, 14 was probably different than how he coached him in the first couple of years, the formative years of Tom Brady's career. So I think there's a lot of lessons here for Brian Flores. And if you look at the landscape of coaching in football from Nick Saban to Bill Belichick, Pete Carroll 4 different times, those guys were all fired, learned from their experiences, and went on. Bill Belichick, arguably the greatest coach of all time, fired in Cleveland. Pete Carroll, not until he got to Seattle, his 4th stop did he reach the pinnacle of his career. So I think this actually bodes well for Coach Flores if he does what he says and learns from his mistakes in Miami.
I appreciate that, lad, how you ended that comment, if he shows that he's learned from it. Because here's the thing. Number one, you were in New England for 15 years. So what in terms of Tom Brady, how he was treated in year 10, 12, 13, or whatever compared to how he was treated earlier, you were there for most of that. So let's get that out the way. That's number one. Number two, Kimberley, I can appreciate your point about the players standing beside him to lend support. That doesn't hold mustard because he's a defensive coordinator now as opposed to the head coach. And so because of that, you have somebody that's of a hierarchy that you defer to. You have your unit, but you're not the head coach. So we all know that coordinators' relationships with players is kind of different than a head coach's relationship with different. Now, here's the interesting part. One would argue that a head coach, as an overseer, is usually a bit detached from the personal per se, Kimberley, Mike T. Here's where it gets interesting. It was the opposite with Brian Flores. He was all over Tua, according to Tua. Remember, Kimberley, you both know this. He wanted Justin Herbert. Stephen Ross made him take Tua. So because of that, whatever personal frustrations you had, you may have ended up taking out on Tua because he wasn't your guy. So if you're going to come back in hindsight, retrospectively speaking on your behavior, taking into account what Tua said and saying, I can learn from this, how about the Miami Dolphins and NFL looking at you and saying, okay, so you're going to drop the lawsuit? Because the way you were behaving, you might have inflicted a lot of this upon yourself as opposed to holding us accountable for what you did. I'm not saying that was the truth because I have no idea. What I'm saying is because of what Tua said and his reaction to Tua, where he didn't deny anything that Tua said, that's ammunition for the league and for the Miami Dolphins to ultimately raise their hands and say, what's up? It wasn't us. It wasn't prejudice. It wasn't whatever it is that you're saying. It might have been you. That's why I was looking for the denial from what Tua said. And when I didn't see it, I said, yo, that's not a strong case for him if you're not going to deny what Tua said. Because it's very incriminating.
I think both things can be true, right? Maybe the lawsuit doesn't hold as much water now because there wasn't a denial. But at the same time, the man made a mistake, right? We don't learn in relationships in life when things go well. We learn from adversity when we make mistakes, right? And at the same time, he didn't deny it. He didn't double down. He owned it and said, I need to grow from that. I reflected on that. It seems like he did the work to become better and evolve. So I think both things are true. I think what I'm saying is he handled that well. Right? I don't think Brian Flores could have handled that any better. He made an egregious mistake in Miami. And at the same time, yes, it could potentially affect the lawsuit.
What if,
but hold on, everybody. Hold on. Molly.
Yes.
When you're dealing with something legally, the worst thing you want to do is provide the opposition with any kind of leverage. And what I'm saying is I don't know this to be true. I'm simply saying if you're the NFL, if you're the Miami Dolphins, specifically pertaining to the accusations and allegations that have been levied against you, if Tua says something like that, you got to be mindful enough to know what kind of impact that could potentially have. And as a result, you take whatever position you take. The fact that he owned it and he didn't deny it, as admirable as it is, it may hurt him legally in the case against the NFL and Miami Dolphins. That's all I'm saying.
And Stephen A., let's assume what you're saying is correct for a second. And to your point, Molly, I think what Brian Flores did is even more admirable from this standpoint, guys. He's putting the lawsuit behind him, and that's the past. And he's speaking to 31 other owners, which is the future, which is, again, if the four of us were running an NFL team and we had candidate A who had never coached before, there's a massive unknown if he's to be successful or not. If we brought in Brian Flores and say, tell us about what happened in Miami, and he went through everything I could have done better, what I could have done different, much the way Bill
I got a question for both of y'all. I got a question for both of y'all right here. Please, oh my goodness, thank you for saying what you just said, Mike T. So, Mr. CIA, if you are an executive for an NFL team, I'm taking into account what you just said. Does that matter if the lawsuit is still pending? If you drop it, I get what you're saying 1,000%. But if the lawsuit is still pending, are you trying to tell me that as an opposing team, you're just shoving that aside and you're taking the way that he handled the Tua comments to show his growth, and you're going to let that go when the lawsuit's still pending?
I don't care about the lawsuit. When I'm running an organization, all I want to do is win. Look, when we hired Rex Ryan in 2009, go look at our track record. When we hired Rex Ryan in 2009, he had been passed over multiple times.
We have a lawsuit against the league or the team.
But Stephen A., that's still his truth. That's still his experience. Whether we think he didn't coach Tua or not the right way, if he still feels like racism took place, I mean, those can be completely two separate things. If he felt like...
I'm a black man. That man sitting there talking about racism, I'm down with you, bro. I'm down with you. I ain't running from that. But what I'm asking you is this, rhetorically, Kimberley, Molly, very simple question. If you're working for a network and you sue a network, do you think that makes you attractive to other networks? What am I missing?
No, I get what you're saying, but that's why I respect it even more that he owned it.
Can I just ask, you know, Steven's pointing out the devil's advocate side of this. Sometimes when people are like, you hurt me, you did this, sometimes you're just like, okay. You know, I don't think that Brian Flores is saying, if he had gotten up there and said, that's not how it happened, actually, I didn't do these things, that only prolongs this story and goes on. Like, I don't think just because he didn't, it seems like he didn't deny what Tua was saying. All he did is say, I could have handled some things differently. I've grown. These are my guys, and I wish Tua the best. And that's a toxic relationship that is in the past. You have moved on. You are not trying to go through the autopsy of the relationship. You're not trying to litigate it anymore. It's just, hey, wish him the best, and I have grown. He didn't say everything Tua said is accurate. I think that's actually the better way to handle it. That doesn't mean he agrees with everything Tua said. He said, I'm not that person.
Well, I would say respectfully, I'm disappointed in your response. And let me tell you why.
Tell me.
Because when you look at Tua, I don't think it's an accident that Tua said what he said when he said it. I don't think it's an accident that Dan Le Batard asked him when he asked him. Dan Le Batard does his show in Miami. Dan Le Batard lives in Miami. Dan Le Batard in Miami all day, every day, all the time. And now is when you ask that question? There ain't no damn accident. I'm saying to you Brian Flores, you see through all of that because he's a smart man. You see through all of that. I don't think it's an accident that it happened, and I could be wrong. I don't know. I'm speculating. Openly admit that. I'm just watching it because as a scribe, as a reporter, long before I became a pundit, I've been in this business for 30 years now. I've seen it, and I know most of the time, again, you connect dots. And if you're Miami and you're the NFL, even though Molly is absolutely right, both things can be true. When you got a case pending against you, you're looking for an advantage. Tua provided it. Brian Flores didn't knock it down. I'm saying that's the reality. Yeah. What comes of it, I have no idea. But that is the reality.
Yeah, and also the reality is it appears that Tua's in a better situation under Mike McDaniel, right? His numbers went up. He seems happy. And I'm going to take it at his word that there's some growth on Brian Flores, who's obviously a talented coach, and he landed on his feet. I know he's not a head coach right now, but it doesn't mean he never will be again.
Right, and if Brian would say right here, if Brian would say right here, I would say, look, what that interview was not a death sentence. It was an opportunity to learn, and you can resurrect your career, much the way all these other coaches have. And again, if we were interviewing Brian to be a head coach, that would be question number one. Take us through what happened in Miami and what'd you learn? And the answer should be, that was 1,000,000 years ago. I'm a different coach.
Thanks, Stephen A. When we had Shannon Sharp and we had Ryan Clark on and we were discussing the situation, in terms of, and I don't know the specifics, the terrible person, that's not a good look. But as far as just the way that he was potentially coaching him, right, in terms of breaking him down, both Shannon and Ryan said they had coaches like that. You know, some players can handle that and are okay with that, like extreme tough love. So I don't know how egregious his behavior essentially was unless we witnessed it.
That's fair, but again, or you just lend yourself to being subject to the interpretation of the player who suffered those consequences. You could do that too. The thing that startled me in a very positive way is what Mike T said, that teams wouldn't hold his legal issues against them. They want to win and they care about themselves and they're not concerned about that. But you also have to understand one has nothing to do with the other, and I'm not saying that it does. But we've lamented the state of affairs with Colin Kaepernick for years. Colin Kaepernick sued and ultimately settled a suit with the league, and he ain't been back since. Now, that's not the case with Brian Flores, and I understand that. But it is widely believed that if you've got legal matters, that doesn't lend itself towards you being as attractive as you would be had you not had those matters. So Mike T telling me that's not necessarily applicable to Brian Flores is great news. I hope you're absolutely positively right, because that would be a step in a different direction than I'm accustomed to seeing.